October 15, 2019. A janitor mopping floors at Naval Special Warfare Training Range in California was about to become the talk of every SEAL team in the country, but not for the reason anyone expected. When Staff Sergeant Derek Callahan handed Maria Torres his Custom .300 Win Mag as a joke, he had no idea he was about to be humiliated in front of his entire platoon. But how does a woman who was cleaning bathrooms just minutes before outshoot one of the Navy's most elite snipers at 1,200 yards? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the Naval Special Warfare Training Range as Maria Torres pushed her cleaning cart across the dusty concrete. At 42 years old, she'd been working as a maintenance contractor at the facility for just under 3 months. The job wasn't glamorous, scrubbing toilets, mopping floors, emptying trash cans, but it paid the bills and kept her 2 teenage daughters fed. What nobody at the base knew was that Maria Torres had a past she'd buried deep, wrapped in layers of deliberate obscurity and calculated silence. Staff Sergeant Derek Callahan was having the kind of day that fed his already substantial ego. He'd just completed a training exercise where he'd hit 17 out of 20 targets at 1,000 yards, and his spotter, Lieutenant Josh Brennan, had been appropriately impressed. The rest of Callahan's SEAL Team 7 platoon was scattered around the range, some cleaning weapons, others reviewing performance data on tablets. "That's why they call me Deadshot," Callahan announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying that particular blend of confidence and arrogance that comes from being genuinely good at something dangerous. He was 31, built like he'd been carved from granite, and had the kind of square jaw that looked like it belonged on a recruiting poster. His Custom .300 Winchester Magnum rifle, a weapon he'd personally modified and fine-tuned over 3 years, rested against his shoulder like an extension of his body. "We get it, Derek," Lieutenant Brennan said, shaking his head with a grin. "You're the best shot since Carlos Hathcock himself." "Damn right," Callahan replied, running his hand along the rifle's barrel with something approaching affection. That's when Maria's cartwheel caught on an uneven patch of concrete. The plastic bucket tipped, sending a wave of dirty mop water across the ground, some of it splashing onto Callahan's boots. The entire range went quiet. Maria froze, her weathered hands still gripping the cart handle. She looked up at the towering SEAL operator, whose expression had shifted from pride to irritation in a heartbeat. "Jesus Christ," Callahan muttered, looking down at his boots. "You've got to be kidding me." "I'm so sorry, sir," Maria said quickly, her slight accent marking her words. She immediately grabbed a towel from her cart and dropped to her knees, attempting to wipe the water off his boots. "I didn't see the crack in the concrete. I'm very sorry." Several of the other SEALs had turned to watch the scene unfold. Petty Officer First Class Ryan Mitchum chuckled from his position 20 feet away. "Looks like you've got an admirer, Callahan." The comment drew a few more laughs from the team. Callahan's jaw tightened. He wasn't actually that angry about the water. It was hardly the worst thing that had happened to his boots. But the laughter from his teammates stung his pride. He was the platoon's top sniper, the guy who never missed, the operator everyone else measured themselves against. Being on his knees getting his boots dried by a middle-aged janitor wasn't exactly reinforcing that image. "It's fine," he said curtly, stepping back. "Just watch where you're going." Maria stood up, clutching the damp towel, her eyes downcast. "Yes, sir. Again, I apologize." That should have been the end of it. Maria should have pushed her cart away. Callahan should have returned to basking in his earlier performance. The range should have resumed its normal rhythm of military efficiency and masculine posturing. But Ryan Mitchum couldn't resist one more jab. "Hey, Callahan," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe she could give you some tips." On keeping things clean. Lord knows your shooting could use a little housekeeping. The comment was absurd. Callahan's shooting was nearly flawless, but it landed in that weird space where military banter lives, somewhere between genuine ribbing and testing boundaries. Callahan's face reddened slightly. He looked at Maria, then at his rifle, then back at his teammate. His brain made one of those split-second decisions that would haunt him for years to come. "You know what?" Callahan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He held out his custom rifle toward Maria. "Why don't you show us how it's done, since apparently I need cleaning tips?" The range went silent again, but this time the silence had weight to it. Maria stared at the weapon being offered to her, her expression unreadable. "Sir, I don't think," she began. "Come on," Callahan pressed, that edge of cruelty creeping into his voice. "Just one shot. Show us how a professional really handles things." Lieutenant Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Derek, maybe, what's the matter?" Callahan interrupted. "Afraid she might embarrass me?" He laughed at his own joke, and a few of the other SEALs joined in nervously. Maria's hands remained at her sides. For a long moment, she simply looked at the rifle, then at Callahan's face, then out at the distant targets scattered across the range. Something flickered in her eyes, something that hadn't been there moments before. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like ... calculation. "One shot?" she asked quietly. "One shot," Callahan confirmed, still holding out the rifle. "Hell, if you hit anything at all, I'll buy you dinner." More laughter from the peanut gallery. Maria reached out slowly and took the weapon. The moment her hands wrapped around it, something changed in her posture. It was subtle. Most of the SEALs watching didn't even notice it, but the way she handled the rifle suggested a familiarity that didn't match her job description. She checked the chamber with a smooth, practiced motion that made Lieutenant Brennan's eyebrows rise slightly. Then she looked at Callahan. "Which target?" she asked. Callahan's grin widened. This was going to be entertaining. He pointed to a steel silhouette at 400 yards, an easy distance for a trained sniper, but essentially impossible for someone who'd never handled a precision rifle before. "That one," he said. Maria nodded once. She moved toward the shooting position Callahan had just vacated. Her cleaning uniform, a shapeless gray polo shirt, and cargo pants, hanging loose on her thin frame. Several of the SEALs had pulled out their phones, sensing that this was about to become a story worth recording. "Somebody want to explain windage to her?" One of them called out. "Nah," another responded. "Let's see what happens." Maria settled into a prone position behind the rifle, with a fluidity that made Lieutenant Brennan exchange a glance with another operator. She adjusted the stock, checked the scope, and then did something that made several of the watching SEALs pause. She tested the wind by wetting her finger and holding it up, a gesture so natural and unself-conscious that it seemed automatic. "Hold on," Ryan Mitchum said, his voice losing its joking tone. "Has she done this before?" Callahan waved him off. "She's stalling." Building drama, but Maria wasn't stalling. She was settling into the rifle like she was greeting an old friend. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. And when she pressed her cheek against the stock, something in her entire demeanor shifted from downtrodden janitor to something else entirely. Something dangerous. "Whenever you're ready," Callahan said. His arms crossed over his chest. Maria's finger found the trigger. The range held its breath, and then she squeezed. The crack of the .300 Win mag split the afternoon air like thunder. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the distant steel target rang out with a metallic clang that echoed across the range, the silhouette swinging backward from the impact before settling back into position, dead center. The laughter died instantly. Several phones that had been recording dropped slightly as their owners' jaws went slack. Ryan Mitchum's smirk vanished like someone had wiped it off with a cloth. Callahan's expression flickered through several Emotions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked uncomfortably like the first stirrings of actual concern. "Beginner's luck," he said, but his voice had lost its swagger. Maria worked the bolt with a smooth, practiced motion that spoke of muscle memory built over thousands of repetitions, ejecting the spent casing. It arced through the air and landed in the dirt with a soft ping. She remained in position, her eyes still pressed to the scope, her breathing controlled and even. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You said one shot," she said quietly, still not looking at him. "Yeah, I did," Callahan replied, trying to regain his composure. "Nice shot, really, I mean it." Maria finally looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes that Callahan couldn't quite read. It wasn't pride or smugness emotions he would have understood. It was something closer to resignation, as if she'd just done something she'd been trying very hard not to do. Lieutenant Brennan stepped forward, his tactical mind already working through the impossibility of what he'd just witnessed. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" Before Maria could answer, Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Vega, who'd been observing from the 600-yard line, came jogging over, his tablet in hand. His face was pale. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice tight, "you need to see this." Brennan took the tablet. On the screen was a ballistics analysis from the range's automated tracking system. The system recorded every shot fired on the range, analyzing trajectory, accuracy, and a dozen other variables. What it showed made Brennan's eyes widen. "This can't be right," he muttered. "What?" Callahan demanded, moving closer. Brennan turned the tablet so he could see. The wind was gusting at 7 miles per hour from the northwest. The temperature differential between here and the target creates a mirage effect that shifts perceived impact point by approximately 4 inches at this distance. Your rifle's been zeroed for 200 yards, which means at 400 she needed to compensate for roughly 8 inches of drop. "So?" Callahan said, though his voice had gone quiet. So Brennan continued, "She made all those calculations in her head in under 20 seconds and executed a perfect shot with a weapon she'd never fired before, using someone else's custom scope setup." He looked at Maria, who was now standing, holding the rifle loosely at her side. "That's not beginner's luck. That's expert-level marksmanship." The pieces were starting to fall into place for several of the operators. The way she'd handled the weapon, the wind check, the breathing, the posture. "Who are you?" Brennan asked directly. Maria handed the rifle back to Callahan with both hands, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. "I'm exactly who my employee badge says I am, Maria Torres. I clean buildings." "That's not an answer," Callahan said, and now the arrogance was completely gone from his voice, replaced by something that might have been embarrassment, or might have been genuine curiosity. Maria picked up her towel from where she'd dropped it and returned it to her cart. "I should get back to work. The administrative building needs attention before the staff returns from lunch." She started to push her cart away. "Wait," Lieutenant Brennan called out. When Maria paused, he walked over to her, his voice low enough that only she and a few nearby operators could hear. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 12 years. I've trained with some of the best shooters in the world. What you just did, that's not something you pick up at a civilian range on weekends. That's military-grade training, probably advanced sniper school or equivalent." Maria's hands tightened on the cart handle. For a long moment, she said nothing. The sun continued to beat down. Somewhere in the distance, another training exercise was underway. The sound of automatic weapons fire creating a staccato rhythm. "I had a different life before this one," she finally said. "A long time ago." "What branch?" Brennan pressed gently. Maria looked at him, then at Callahan, then at the small group of SEALs who were now watching with genuine interest rather than amusement. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind, calculating risks and benefits with the same precision she'd used to make that shot. "Marine Corps," she said quietly. "Scout sniper. I served from 1995 to 2003. The revelation landed like a bomb." "Wait," Ryan Mitchum said, stepping forward. "Women weren't allowed in Scout Sniper School back then." "The policy didn't change until 2013, Maria finished. "I'm aware. The policy changed 10 years after I was already doing the job." Callahan's face had gone from red to white. "That's impossible." "A lot of things were impossible back then," Maria said, her voice taking on an edge. "That didn't stop them from happening." Lieutenant Brennan's mind was racing. He pulled out his phone and started typing quickly. "What was your designation, your unit?" Maria hesitated again. This was clearly territory she didn't want to venture into. "Does it matter? That person doesn't exist anymore. I'm a janitor now. I push a cart and clean toilets and try to keep my head down." "It matters to me," Callahan said, and there was something different in his voice now. The mockery was gone. "You just made me look like an amateur with my own rifle. I think I've earned the right to know who taught you to shoot like that." Maria studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed, the kind of deep, weary sigh that comes from carrying secrets for too long. 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. "I was part of an off-books program in the late 90s. They called it Operation Nightingale. Women who scored exceptionally high on marksmanship and met all the physical requirements were quietly recruited for sniper training. We didn't officially exist. No records, no recognition, no paper trail." Brennan's fingers flew across his phone screen, then they stopped. His face went pale. "Holy shit," he whispered. "What?" Several voices asked at once. Brennan looked up from his phone, his eyes wide. "Operation Nightingale. I've heard rumors about this. Urban legend stuff that instructors would mention after a few beers. There was supposedly this program where they trained female snipers for missions in countries where male soldiers couldn't operate effectively. Middle East, North Africa, places where a woman could move through certain spaces invisible." "It wasn't an urban legend," Maria said flatly. "It was very real. And it was very classified." Callahan looked like someone had just told him the sky was actually green. "How many missions?" "Enough," Maria said. "More than enough." "What happened?" Brennan asked. "Why are you here pushing a cleaning cart instead of teaching at sniper school or working private security?" Maria's face hardened. "The program was shut down in 2002. Budget cuts, they said. Political liability, more likely. We were given honorable discharges and DAs that could land us in Leavenworth if we violated them, and a handshake. Most of us scattered to the wind. Some went into law enforcement. Some went into security work. Some, like me, just wanted to disappear." She started pushing her cart again. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I really do have work to do." This time, no one tried to stop her. The SEALs watched her go in stunned silence, the sound of her cart's squeaky wheel gradually fading as she made her way toward the administrative building. Callahan stood frozen, his custom rifle hanging forgotten in his hands, staring at the target that still bore the evidence of impossible skill from an impossible source. "I think," Ryan Mitchum said slowly, "you might owe her more than dinner." Callahan didn't respond. He was too busy replaying the last 15 minutes in his head, watching his casual cruelty transform into something far more complicated. Lieutenant Josh Brennan couldn't let it go. That evening, after the range had shut down and most of the platoon had dispersed to various activities, some hitting the gym, others heading into town, a few nursing beers at the on-base recreation center, Brennan sat in his cramped office staring at his computer screen. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed with that particular frequency that gave him headaches. But he barely noticed Operation Nightingale. He'd found 3 references to it buried in forums, frequented by retired military personnel. Each mention was vague, wrapped in the kind of careful language people used when they were dancing around classified information. One former Marine instructor from Quantico had written cryptically about the best students we ever had that nobody knows about. Another post, from 2011, mentioned female snipers who'd operated in Yemen and Saudi Arabia during the late 90s, dismissed by most readers as fantasy. The problem was that official records showed nothing. No program by that name existed in any database he could access. No budget allocations, no training rosters, no after-action reports. If Operation Nightingale had been real, and after watching Maria Torres make that shot, Brennan had zero doubt it was real, then someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase it from history. A knock on his doorframe made him look up. Callahan stood there, still in his range clothes, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "You got a minute?" Callahan asked. Brennan gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Come in, close the door." Callahan did, then sat heavily. For a moment, he just stared at his hands. "I was a complete asshole today." "Yeah," Brennan agreed, seeing no reason to sugarcoat it. "You were." "I just thought," Callahan started, then stopped. "I don't know what I thought. That it would be funny? That I'd get a laugh from the guys?" "You humiliated someone you thought couldn't fight back," Brennan said flatly. "That's not funny. That's just bullying." Callahan winced but didn't argue. "Have you found anything?" Brennan turned his monitor so Callahan could see the sparse search results. "Not much. Whatever this program was, it's buried deep. I've got feelers out to a couple of guys I know who work at JSOC, but I'm not optimistic. If this was genuinely black ops, we might never know the full story." "But you believe her," Callahan said. It wasn't quite a question. "After that shot, absolutely." Brennan leaned back in his chair. "Nobody makes that kind of adjustment on the fly without serious training. And the way she handled your rifle? That wasn't her first time behind a scope, Derek. That was someone who spent years perfecting their craft." Callahan nodded slowly. "I keep replaying it in my head. The way she checked the wind, the breathing, the trigger control. It was textbook perfect. Better than textbook, actually. It was instinctive." "Which raises an interesting question," Brennan said. "If she's that good, why is she cleaning toilets at a naval base? Why not teaching? Why not contracting? Someone with her skills could be making 6 figures working private security." "She said she wanted to disappear," Callahan reminded him. "Yeah, but from what?" Brennan pulled up a blank document on his screen. "Think about it. The program gets shut down in 2002. That's 23 years ago. Whatever happened, she's been off the grid for over 2 decades. That's not just wanting a quiet life. That's running from something." Callahan shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just let it go." "She clearly doesn't want to talk about it." Brennan studied his teammate. "Since when do you back down from anything?" "Since I realized I might have reopened wounds that someone spent 20 years trying to heal," Callahan said quietly. "Look, I'm not proud of what I did today. I was showing off and I picked the wrong target. But maybe the right thing to do now is just apologize and move on." Before Brennan could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his eyebrows rose. "It's Commander Hayes. He wants to see both of us in his office, now." The 2 SEALs exchanged glances. Commander Richard Hayes was the commanding officer of their entire training facility, a career Navy man who'd come up through the SEAL teams in the 80s and 90s. He wasn't the type to call impromptu evening meetings unless something serious had happened. They found Commander Hayes in his office, a space that managed to be both Spartan and intimidating. The walls were covered with photos from deployments spanning 3 decades, unit patches and commendations. Hayes himself was in his late 50s, gray-haired, but still built like he could run a marathon on a whim. He was standing behind his desk when they entered, his expression unreadable. "Sit," he ordered. They sat. Hayes remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "I got an interesting phone call about an hour ago. From a 2-star general at JSOC headquarters who wanted to know why people were asking questions about Operation Nightingale." He looked directly at Brennan. "That would be you, Lieutenant." Brennan kept his expression neutral. "Sir, I was simply following up on information that came to light during range operations today." "Information," Hayes repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" He finally sat down, his chair creaking slightly. "Tell me exactly what happened on that range today. And I mean exactly." Callahan took the lead, walking through the entire incident. From the spilled water to Maria's shock to her revelation about her past. To his credit, he didn't try to minimize his own role or make excuses. Hayes listened without interruption, his face giving nothing away. When Callahan finished, Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thin file folder. He set it on the desk but didn't open it. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," Hayes said. "Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," they said in unison. Hayes tapped the folder. Operation Nightingale was real. It ran from 1996 to 2002 under the joint command of Marine Corps Intelligence and the Defense Intelligence Agency. The program recruited and trained 14 female Marines as scout snipers and intelligence operatives. The official reason was to address operational gaps in regions where male soldiers couldn't effectively operate. The unofficial reason was that some very smart people realized we were fighting with one hand tied behind our backs by not utilizing half the population. Brennan leaned forward slightly. "Why was it classified?" "Because in the 90s the idea of women in direct combat roles was political dynamite," Hayes said. "Congress would have shut it down immediately if they'd known. So it was kept off the books. The women were officially listed as intelligence analysts or administrative personnel. Their actual missions were buried in reports that made them look like they were just translating documents or conducting interviews." "What kind of missions?" Callahan asked. Hayes opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper with most of the text redacted. What remained visible were dates, locations, and single-word descriptors: surveillance, reconnaissance, elimination. The kind that prevented terrorist attacks, gathered intelligence that saved American lives, and removed threats that male operators couldn't get close to, Hayes said. These women operated in Somalia, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Afghanistan. They posed as aid workers, teachers, doctors. They went places we couldn't go and did things we couldn't do. "How successful were they?" Brennan asked. 14 operators, 6 years of active operations, 0 casualties, 0 failed missions, Hayes said. They had a perfect record. Better than most Tier 1 units, if we're being honest. Callahan felt something twist in his stomach. Then why shut it down? Politics, budget cuts, shifting priorities after 9/11s, Hayes said. The argument was made that with the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, we didn't need covert female operatives anymore. We had boots on the ground everywhere. The program was deemed redundant. He closed the folder. It was also deemed embarrassing. Here was proof that women could not only hang with elite male operators, but in some contexts outperform them. That didn't fit the narrative certain people wanted to maintain, so they buried it, Brennan said. They buried it, Hayes confirmed. The women were given honorable discharges, generous NDAs with severe penalties for violation, and sent on their way. Most of them struggled to reintegrate. Their service was classified, so they couldn't talk about what they'd done. They couldn't use their skills openly. They couldn't even admit they'd been in combat roles. That's Maria Torres, Callahan said quietly. She's been in hiding for 20 years because she can't tell anyone who she really is. Hayes fixed him with a hard stare. Staff Sergeant, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want an honest answer. What were your intentions when you handed that woman your rifle? Callahan met his commander's eyes. I wanted to make her look stupid in front of my team. I wanted to laugh at her expense. And now? Now I'd like to apologize and make it right, sir. Hayes nodded slowly. Here's what's going to happen. First, everyone who was on that range today is going to sign an NDA. What they saw, what they heard, it doesn't get discussed. Second, you two are going to approach Ms. Torres tomorrow and offer her something she should have received 20 years ago. Respect and recognition. He pulled another document from the folder. I've been authorized to offer her a position. Brennan's eyes widened. What kind of position, sniper instructor? Hayes said. Contract position, civilian designation, competitive pay. She'd be teaching our scout snipers and some SEAL candidates. No deployment requirements, no publicity, just pure teaching. She can turn it down if she wants. But after what you've told me about that shot, I think we'd be idiots not to try to bring her on board. You think she'd accept? Callahan asked. I have no idea, Hayes admitted. But it's the least we can offer someone who served her country in ways most people will never know about and got nothing but silence in return. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. Get some sleep. Tomorrow morning, 0800, we're all going to have a conversation with Miss Torres. And Staff Sergeant? Sir, you're going to lead with an apology that actually means something. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. As they left the commander's office and walked through the dim corridors of the administrative building, Callahan felt the weight of what he'd learned settling onto his shoulders. Somewhere in this facility, a woman who'd risked her life for her country in ways he was only beginning to understand was probably finishing up her cleaning shift, invisible to everyone around her. Hey, Brennan said as they reached the exit. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Making up for being an asshole shouldn't require a medal, Callahan replied. But thanks. They stepped out into the California night. The base was quiet, most personnel either off duty or bedded down for the evening. Somewhere in the distance, the ocean rolled against the shore in an endless rhythm. Brennan's phone buzzed again. He checked it and frowned. What? Callahan asked. One of my contacts at JSOC got back to me, Brennan said, reading the message. He says there's more to Maria Torres' story than just Operation Nightingale. Something that happened in 2003, right after the program shut down. Something that's still classified above his pay grade. What kind of something? He doesn't know. But he said if I wanted to understand why she's been hiding for 20 years, I should ask her about Karachi. The name hung in the air between them. Like smoke, Karachi, Pakistan, Callahan said, apparently. Whatever happened there, it's the reason her file is sealed tighter than nuclear launch codes. Callahan stared out at the darkened base. Tomorrow they would apologize. Tomorrow they would offer her a job. But the question that now burned in his mind was different from the questions he'd had that afternoon. What had happened in Karachi that was so catastrophic it had forced Maria Torres to spend 20 years invisible. Maria Torres hadn't slept well. She rarely did anymore, but last night had been particularly brutal. The moment she'd squeezed that trigger, she'd known there would be consequences. You don't stay hidden for 20 years and then casually demonstrate elite-level skills without attracting attention. She sat at her small kitchen table in her modest apartment in Oceanside, nursing her third cup of coffee as dawn broke over the California coast. The apartment was sparse functional furniture, no decorations except for a single framed photo of her daughters, Elena and Sophia, at their high school graduation last year. Everything else in her life could fit in 2 suitcases if she needed to move quickly. Old habits died hard. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor at the contracting company. Commander Hayes wants to meet with you. 800, his office. Bring your employee file. Maria stared at the message for a long moment. This was it. Either she was being fired for making the Navy look bad, or something worse was coming. She'd violated her NDA by admitting to Operation Nightingale's existence. That alone could land her in a military prison for years. She typed back a simple, "Acknowledged," and set the phone down. In the bedroom, she could hear Elena moving around, getting ready for her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. Sophia was already at UC San Diego, pursuing a degree in engineering. Both girls had gotten scholarships, thank God, because Maria's janitor salary barely covered rent and groceries. "Mom?" Elena called from the hallway. "You okay?" "You're up early." "Work thing," Maria called back, keeping her voice steady. "Nothing to worry about." Elena appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked so much like Maria had at that age before the Marines, before the missions, before everything that had carved lines into Maria's face and shadows into her eyes. "You sure?" Elena pressed. "You look stressed." Maria forced a smile. "Just a meeting with management. Probably about cleaning protocols or something equally boring." Elena studied her mother with the kind of perceptive gaze that made Maria both proud and uncomfortable. Her daughters had inherited her ability to read people, to notice details others missed. It made lying to them harder than it should be. "Okay," Elena said finally, "but call me if you need anything." "Love you. Love you too, Mia." After Elena left, Maria sat in the silence of her apartment, wrestling with a decision she'd been avoiding for 2 decades. The truth was a weight she'd carried alone for so long that it had become part of her skeleton, structural and permanent. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to set it down. She arrived at the base at 0745, giving herself time to mentally prepare. The guard at the gate checked her credentials, the same credentials she'd shown 100 times before, but this time he made a phone call and told her to wait. 5 minutes later, a young petty officer arrived in a golf cart to escort her directly to the administrative building. The special treatment made her stomach clench. Commander Hayes's office was on the 3rd floor. The petty officer led her there and knocked on the door. "Come in," Hayes's voice called. Maria stepped inside and immediately saw that this wasn't going to be a simple termination meeting. Commander Hayes sat behind his desk, but Lieutenant Brennan and Staff Sergeant Callahan were also present, standing at ease near the window. All 3 men turned to look at her as she entered. "Ms. Torres," Hayes said, standing and gesturing to an empty chair. "Please sit down." Maria remained standing, her employee file clutched in her hands. "Sir, if this is about yesterday, I want to apologize for any disruption I caused. It won't happen again." "Sit," Hayes repeated, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. She sat, her back ramrod straight, decades of military bearing overriding her janitor's posture. Hayes sat back down and folded his hands on his desk. "Ms. Torres, I'm going to be direct with you. I know about Operation Nightingale. I know about your service record. And I know that yesterday, for the first time in over 20 years, you let someone see who you really are." Maria's hands tightened on the file folder. "Sir, I signed an NDA. If I violated it, you're not in trouble," Hayes interrupted. "At least not the kind you're thinking of. Staff Sergeant Callahan has something he'd like to say to you." Maria finally looked at Callahan. The arrogance from yesterday was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine discomfort. He stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Torres," he began, and she could hear the effort it took him to meet her eyes. "What I did yesterday was completely out of line. I humiliated you because I thought it would be funny, because I thought you couldn't fight back. I was wrong, and I was cruel, and I'm sorry. You deserved better than that." Maria studied him for a moment. She'd heard a lot of apologies in her Life, most of them hollow, designed to deflect consequences rather than express genuine remorse. But there was something in Callahan's voice that suggested he actually meant it. "Apology accepted," she said quietly. "There's more," Hayes said. He pulled out the thin file folder from his desk, the same one he'd shown Brennan and Callahan the night before. "What you did yesterday reminded me that we have an obligation to people who serve their country, even when that service can't be publicly acknowledged. Especially then, actually." He slid a document across the desk toward her. Maria picked it up and began reading. Her eyes widened as she processed the words. "This is a job offer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sniper instructor position," Hayes confirmed. "Contract civilian role, competitive salary, full benefits. You'd be teaching Marine Scout snipers and select SEAL candidates. No deployments, no field operations, just pure instruction. You'd be one of the highest paid people on this base." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she held the paper. "Why?" "Because you're one of the best shots I've ever seen," Callahan said. "And because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted cleaning floors." "I've been cleaning floors for 20 years, Maria said, and there was an edge to her voice now. "Why does it matter now? Why not 10 years ago? Why not when I first got out and actually needed this kind of opportunity?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Hayes leaned back in his chair. "You're right to be angry," he said. "What happened to you and the other Nightingale operators was wrong. You served with distinction, you completed impossible missions, and you were rewarded with silence and erasure. I can't fix that. I can't give you back the 20 years you spent invisible, but I can offer you this." Maria set the document down on the desk. "There are strings attached. There always are." "Just one," Hayes said. "You don't talk about your missions. The NDA still stands. You can teach, you can use your skills, you can even put military sniper instructor on your resume. But the specifics of what you did between 1996 and 2003 stay classified." "Until when?" "Probably until we're all dead," Hayes said bluntly. "I'm sorry. That's the reality of black operations. The people who plan them get promotions. The people who execute them get silence." Maria picked up the document again, reading through the details. The salary listed was more than triple what she made as a janitor. With that kind of money, she could help her daughters more, maybe even save for retirement. She could stop worrying about every grocery bill and car repair. More than that, she could do the thing she'd been trained to do. She could teach others the skills that had kept her alive through mission after mission in places most people couldn't find on a map. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," Hayes said. "But while you're thinking, I'd like to ask you a question, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. What happened in Karachi?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Maria's face went carefully blank, the kind of blank that comes from years of practice at hiding emotions. "That's classified above your pay grade, Commander." "I know," Hayes said. "But yesterday, you broke 20 years of silence about who you are. Maybe it's time to break the silence about what happened." "With all due respect, sir, no." Maria stood, clutching the job offer. "I'll give you my answer about the position within 48 hours." She turned to leave, but Brennan spoke up for the first time. "Ms. Torres, I've been doing some digging. Whatever happened in Karachi, it's why you've been hiding. It's why you've been living under the radar for 2 decades. Don't you think it's time someone knew the truth?" Maria stopped at the door, her back to them. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she spoke, her voice so quiet they had to strain to hear it. "Karachi is why 3 good women are dead and why I wake up every night at 03:00 covered in sweat. Karachi is why I can't look at my own reflection without seeing their faces. Karachi is why I've spent 20 years making sure no one ever knows my name. She turned her head slightly, not quite looking back at them. And you want me to talk about it, like it's some interesting war story? No, Callahan said, surprising himself by speaking. We want you to talk about it, because keeping it inside is killing you. Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't know anything about me, Staff Sergeant. I know you made a perfect shot yesterday, with a rifle you'd never fired before, Callahan said. I know you've been hiding in plain sight for 20 years, and I know that kind of dedication to invisibility doesn't come from wanting privacy. It comes from running from something so bad you'd rather disappear completely than face it. Maria's hand tightened on the doorknob. The answer is still no. But she didn't open the door. Hayes stood and walked around his desk, moving slowly like he was approaching a spooked animal. Miss Torres, I'm not going to force you to talk about anything. But I want you to know that whatever happened in Karachi, whatever you did or didn't do, it doesn't change the fact that you're a patriot who served her country with honor. You deserve better than to spend the rest of your life cleaning up after people who don't know the first thing about sacrifice. Honor, Maria repeated, and now there was definitely an edge of bitterness in her voice. Do you know what the word honor means to someone who's been erased from history, Commander? It means nothing. It's just a word people use to make themselves feel better about the way they treat their tools. You're not a tool, Brennan said quietly. You're a human being who did extraordinarily difficult things in impossible circumstances. Maria finally turned to face them fully. Her eyes were dry, but there was something fierce burning in them. You want to know about Karachi? Fine, I'll tell you about Karachi, but not here. Not in some sterile office where you can all nod and pretend you understand. Where then? Hayes asked. The range, Maria said. Tonight, after everyone else has gone home. Bring the file on Operation Nightingale, the real file, not the sanitized version. And bring whatever clearance you need to hear classified information without reporting it. Why the range? Callahan asked. Maria's expression was unreadable. Because what happened in Karachi happened through a scope at 800 meters. If I'm going to tell you about it, you're going to understand what that distance means. You're going to see the world the way I saw it that day. Hayes considered this for a moment, then nodded. Tonight, 2,100 hours, I'll make the arrangements. Maria opened the door, then paused. One more thing. If I take this job, if I come out of hiding and start teaching, there's a chance someone will recognize me. Someone who knew about Nightingale. Someone who was there in Karachi. And if that happens, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? Brennan asked. The kind that end careers, Maria said. Or lives. The people who shut down Operation Nightingale did it for a reason. They buried us because we knew things, because we'd seen things, because we represented an embarrassment to people with power. Those people are still out there, some of them in very high positions. They won't be happy if one of us starts making noise. Are you saying you're in danger? Hayes asked sharply. I'm saying we all might be, Maria said. But I've been running for 20 years, and I'm tired. So if you want the truth about Karachi, I'll give it to you. But understand that once I start talking, there's no going back. For any of us. She left before anyone could respond, the door closing behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot. The three men stood in silence for a moment. Well, Brennan said finally, that went better than expected. Did it? Callahan asked. Because I feel like we just opened Pandora's box. Hayes returned to his desk and sat down heavily. Maybe we did. But she's right about one thing. She's been running for too long. Whatever happened in Karachi, it's time someone knew the truth, even if that truth ends our careers. Brennan asked. Hayes picked up the Nightingale folder and stared at it. I've been in the Navy for 33 years, Lieutenant. I've seen good people destroyed by bureaucracy, by politics, by classified operations that should never have been classified. If telling this woman's story costs me my stars, then I'll go out knowing I did one decent thing before I retired. Callahan looked out the window at the training range in the distance, thinking about the shot Maria had made. Perfect placement, perfect timing, executed with the kind of casual precision that came from thousands of hours of practice. What kind of mission required that level of skill? And what had gone so wrong that it had sent Maria Torres into hiding? For 2 decades? Tonight, they would find out, if they were ready for the answer. The range was empty by the time darkness fell. Commander Hayes had cleared it personally, sending home the last stragglers and posting signs that cited equipment maintenance as the reason for the closure. Now at 20:55 hours, 3 men stood, waiting in the cool California night, their breath visible in the autumn air. Lieutenant Brennan had brought a tactical flashlight and a tablet loaded with what Hayes had been able to pull from classified servers, heavily redacted reports from 2003, mission logs that raised more questions than they answered, and a single photograph that showed 4 women in civilian clothes standing in front of a building. Marked only with GPS coordinates, Callahan had brought his rifle. He wasn't sure why exactly, but it had seemed important somehow. If Maria was going to tell them about Karachi through the lens of a scope, then having the weapon present felt appropriate. Hayes had brought the complete Operation Nightingale. File or as complete as still existed after 20 years of bureaucratic erosion. He'd also brought something else, a bottle of 18-year-old scotch and 4 glasses. Some stories required something stronger than coffee. At precisely 2,100 hours, Maria Torres emerged from the darkness. She'd changed out of her cleaning uniform into dark jeans and a black jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. And in the dim light, it was possible to see the woman she'd been 20 years ago, lean, focused, dangerous. She walked to where they stood near the 800-meter mark on the range, her boots crunching on gravel. Without preamble, she took Callahan's rifle from his hands, checked the chamber, and settled into a prone position behind it. The movement was so fluid, it looked choreographed. "There," she said, pointing into the darkness toward a target barely visible in the distance. "That's 800 meters. That's the distance I was from the target in Karachi." The 3 men exchanged glances but said nothing. Maria adjusted the scope, her breathing already falling into the controlled rhythm of a shooter preparing to engage. March 14, 2003. The mission was supposed to be simple surveillance and intelligence gathering. There was a compound in the Orangi Town district of Karachi, where we had intelligence suggesting a high-value target was meeting with financiers connected to Al-Qaeda. Male operators couldn't get close without drawing attention. The area was dense, residential, conservative. A woman could move through it invisible. She paused, her eye still pressed to the scope. There were 4 of us on that mission. Me, Corporal Jessica Reeves, Sergeant Amy Chun, and Staff Sergeant Monica Patterson. Patterson was our team leader. She'd been with Nightingale since the beginning, had more confirmed eliminations than anyone else in the program. She was brilliant. Hayes pulled out the photograph and looked at it in the dim light. 4 women, their faces relaxed and smiling. The image of people who trusted each other completely. "We'd been in position for 3 days, Maria continued, her voice taking on a distant quality, as if she was narrating events happening to someone else. Reeves and Chun were in the compound, posing as aid workers. Patterson and I were in overwatch positions. She was on a rooftop 600 meters north. I was in an abandoned apartment building 800 meters east. Our job was to provide security and take surveillance photos. What went wrong?" Brennan asked quietly. Maria's finger traced along the trigger guard, not quite touching it. On the 3rd day, the target showed up. Not just one high-value target, 3 of them. People we'd been hunting for months. The kind of people who planned attacks that killed hundreds. Patterson called it in, asked for orders. The response came back in 30 minutes. Eliminate all 3 targets, extract the team. She finally looked up from the scope, her eyes finding Hayes. You understand what that meant, Commander? We weren't supposed to be a direct action unit. Nightingale was surveillance and intelligence. We weren't supposed to exist, which meant we definitely weren't supposed to be executing targeted killings in a Pakistani city. But you received the order, Hayes said. We received the order, Maria confirmed. She returned to the scope. Patterson coordinated the hit. Chun and Reeves were supposed to exit the compound on a predetermined signal, move to the extraction. Point 2 blocks away. Patterson and I would engage the targets simultaneously. She'd take 2, I'd take 1. Clean, professional, no collateral damage, in and out. The night air felt heavier now, charged with the weight of what was coming. What was your target? Callahan asked. A man named Rashid Khalil, Maria said. Saudi national, financier for multiple terrorist organizations, personally responsible for funding at least 4 major attacks. He was in a second-floor room with the other targets, visible through a window. Range to target, 847 meters. Wind, 8 kilometers per hour from the northwest. Temperature, 31 degrees Celsius. Humidity, 73%. She recited the numbers like a liturgy, each one burned into her memory with perfect clarity. I had a perfect shot, she continued. Crosshairs on his center mass. I was waiting for Patterson's. Signal 3 clicks on the radio. When I heard them, I was supposed to take the shot, and she would engage her 2 targets within half a second. Simultaneous elimination, maximum confusion, minimum response time. Brennan was taking notes on his tablet, recording everything. This was the kind of operational detail that never made it into official reports. I heard the 3 clicks, Maria said. I squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. Through the scope, I saw Cowell's head snap back. Center mass hit, exactly as planned. I was already acquiring the second target, one of Patterson's, in case she needed backup, when I heard the explosion. The word hung in the air like smoke. Explosion? Hayes said sharply. Maria's hands tightened on the rifle. The compound had been rigged. Improvised explosive devices in the walls, maybe in the furniture. Someone had known we were coming. The moment we took those shots, the entire building went up. I watched through my scope as the second floor just disappeared in fire and smoke. Chun and Reeves, Brennan whispered. They were still inside, Maria said, and now there was raw pain in her voice. They were supposed to be on their way out. But something had delayed them. Maybe they couldn't move without drawing attention. Maybe they were waiting for a better moment. It doesn't matter. When those bombs went off, they were still in that building. She pulled away from the scope and sat up, her back against the shooting berm. In the darkness, tears glistened on her cheeks. I abandoned my position and ran. I wasn't thinking, wasn't following protocol. I just ran. It took me 12 minutes to reach the compound. By the time I got there, the entire structure was engulfed. Pakistani emergency services were already arriving. There were crowds, chaos, people screaming. Patterson? Callahan asked. I found her in an alley 3 blocks away, Maria said. She'd taken shrapnel from a secondary explosion when she'd tried to reach the compound. She was bleeding out. I tried to stop it, tried to keep pressure on the wounds, but there was too much damage. She looked at me and said, "Get out. Tell them what happened. Make sure they know we didn't fail." Then she died in my arms. Hayes poured scotch into all 4 glasses with shaking hands. He passed them around, and they all drank in silence. The extraction team found me an hour later, Maria continued. I was still holding Patterson's body. They sedated me, got me out of the country on a military transport. When I woke up, I was in a hospital in Germany, being debriefed by people whose names I never learned. They told me the mission was classified at the highest levels. They told me I'd done my duty. They told me I would never speak about what happened. They blamed you, Brennan said, understanding flooding through him. Not officially, Maria said bitterly. Officially, there was no mission, no explosion, no dead operators. Jessica Reeves, Amy Chun, and Monica Patterson were quietly listed as training accidents at different locations on different days. Their families were told they died serving their country, but couldn't be given details for national security reasons. They were buried with honors and separate ceremonies that I wasn't allowed to attend. She stood and walked to the edge of the range, staring into the darkness. But unofficially? Oh yes, I was blamed. The investigation concluded that I had taken my shot 3 seconds too early, before Chun and Reeves were clear. That my impatience had cost 3 lives. That I had violated the rules of engagement and compromised the mission. That's bullshit, Callahan said with sudden vehemence. You followed orders. You took the shot when you were told to take it. The person who gave those orders retired 2 months later, Maria said. Full pension, commendations, the works. He now works as a defense consultant, making 7 figures a year. Meanwhile, I spent 20 years cleaning toilets because I was too afraid to put my real skills on a resume. Hayes set down his glass carefully. Who gave the order? Maria turned to face them. Does it matter? He was following orders from someone higher up, who was following orders from someone even higher. It goes all the way to the top commander. Someone in Washington decided that eliminating those targets was worth the risk. Someone miscalculated. Someone didn't know about the explosives or didn't care. And when it all went sideways, they needed someone to blame who couldn't fight back. A woman from a program that didn't officially exist, Brennan said. Exactly, Maria confirmed. I was perfect. I couldn't defend myself without violating my NDA. I couldn't tell my side of the story without risking prison. So I signed the papers. They put in front of me, took my discharge, and disappeared. She returned to where they stood and picked up her glass of scotch, downing it in one swallow. For 20 years, I've lived with the knowledge that 3 of the best operators I ever knew died because someone made a mistake and blamed it on me. I've lived with their faces in my dreams, with the sound of that explosion, with the feeling of Patterson's blood on my hands. Why didn't you fight it? Hayes asked. Why didn't you go to the media, to Congress, to someone? Because they were already dead, Maria said simply. Nothing I did was going to bring them back. And going public would have meant their families learned the truth, that their daughters, their wives, their mothers hadn't died in training accidents, that they'd been killed in a botched black operation in Pakistan, that the government had lied to them. I couldn't do that to their families. I couldn't take away the clean narrative they'd been given. She set the glass down, so I stayed quiet. I got a job cleaning buildings. I raised my daughters. I tried to forget that I'd ever been anyone other than Maria Torres, janitor. And it almost worked. Until yesterday, Callahan said. Until yesterday, Maria agreed. She looked at him directly. You want to know something funny, Staff Sergeant? When you handed me that rifle, part of me wanted to miss on purpose, to maintain the cover, to stay invisible. But another part of me, the part that's been screaming silently for 20 years, couldn't do it. That part needed someone to see. Needed someone to know that I'm not just a janitor. That I was good at something once, that I mattered. Callahan met her gaze. You still matter. What happened in Karachi wasn't your fault. Logically, I know that, Maria said. But logic doesn't help much at 030. When you're reliving the moment you watched your friends die through a rifle scope. Hayes had been quiet for several minutes, but now he spoke with quiet authority. Miss Torres, I want you to know something. This conversation never leaves this range. We're the only 4 people who will ever know the complete truth about what happened in Karachi. But I also want you to know that as far as I'm concerned, you did your duty with honor. You followed orders under impossible circumstances. What happened to Chun, Reeves, and Patterson was a tragedy, but it wasn't your fault. The official investigation says otherwise, Maria pointed out. The official investigation was designed to protect people who didn't deserve protection, Hayes countered. I've been in this business long enough to recognize a cover-up when I see one. They used you as a scapegoat because you were convenient and couldn't fight back. He picked up the job offer he brought with him. This offer still stands. You can turn it down if you want, but I hope you'll consider taking it, because teaching the next generation of snipers would be a way of honoring Chun, Reeves, and Patterson. It would be a way of making sure their skills and their sacrifice meant something. Maria took the document and looked at it in the dim light. Her hands were steadier now, the burden of truth slightly lighter for having been shared. I'll think about it, she said finally. But if I do this, if I come out of hiding, I need you to understand something. The people who covered up Karachi are still out there. If they find out I'm talking, if they think I'm a threat to their reputations or their careers, they will come after me. And they won't be gentle about it. Let them try, Callahan said with sudden fierceness. They'll have to go through a platoon of SEALs first. Maria actually smiled at that, a small, sad expression. That's very gallant, Staff Sergeant. But these aren't people who confront you directly. They destroy you with paperwork, with audits, with sudden policy changes that just happen to target exactly what you're doing. They're bureaucratic assassins. Then we'll fight them with bureaucracy, Hayes said. I've got 33 years in this Navy and enough connections to make life very difficult for anyone who tries to retaliate against you. You won't be alone in this. Maria looked at the three men, a commander risking his career, a lieutenant offering his support, and a staff sergeant who'd gone from mockery to genuine respect in less than 24 hours. For the first time in 2 decades, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Okay, she said quietly. I'll take the job, but we do this my way. No publicity, no fanfare, no making me into some kind of symbol. I just want to teach. Agreed, Hayes said immediately. Maria handed Callahan his rifle back. Take care of this weapon, Staff Sergeant. It's a good rifle. Treat it with respect. I will, Callahan promised. And I'll treat the person who showed me how to use it properly with even more respect. As they prepared to leave the range, Brennan had one final question. Ms. Torres, if you could say something to Chun, Reeves, and Patterson now, what would it be? Maria was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the 800-meter mark, where she'd placed that perfect shot 24 hours earlier. I'd tell them I'm sorry it took me so long to stop hiding, she said. And I'd tell them that every student I train from now on will carry a piece of their legacy. They might not know the names, but they'll know the standards. They'll know what excellence looks like, and that will have to be enough. She turned and walked toward the parking lot, her silhouette gradually disappearing into the darkness. The three men watched her go, each processing what they'd learned in their own way. Well, Brennan said finally, I don't know about you two, but I'm never going to look at a janitor the same way again. None of us will, Hayes agreed. None of us will. 3 months later, the Naval Special Warfare Training Range looked different to Staff Sergeant Derek Callahan. Not physically, the targets were in the same positions, the shooting berms unchanged, the California sun just as merciless. But his perspective had shifted in ways he was still processing. He watched from a distance as Maria Torres instructed a group of 8 Marine Scout sniper candidates on wind reading techniques. She'd traded her cleaning uniform for tactical pants and a polo shirt bearing the instructor insignia, but more than her clothes had changed. She stood taller now, spoke with authority, moved with the confidence of someone who no longer had to pretend to be less than she was. The wind doesn't care about your schedule or your ego. She was telling the candidates, all of them young men barely out of their teens. It doesn't care that you've been in position for 6 hours, or that you're tired, or that your spotter is getting impatient. You read it wrong, you miss, someone dies. Maybe you, maybe your team, maybe a civilian who is in the wrong place. Mind reading isn't a skill, it's a responsibility. Callahan smiled slightly. She was a natural teacher, demanding but never demeaning, pushing her students hard while respecting their efforts. In the 3 months since she'd started, her reputation had spread through the special operations community like wildfire. The mysterious civilian instructor who could outshoot almost anyone on base had become something of a legend. Lieutenant. Brennan approached from behind, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to Callahan. She's got them doing elevation calculations in their heads, Brennan observed. No calculators, no ballistic apps, old school. The way she learned, Callahan said, before everyone had smartphones and computers doing the math for them. They watched as Maria demonstrated a shooting position, her movements economical and precise. One of the students asked a question Callahan couldn't hear, and Maria's response made the entire group laugh. You know what the crazy thing is? Callahan sighed. 3 months ago, I walked past her a dozen times and never saw her. Not really. She was just invisible. That was the point, Brennan reminded him. She'd spent 20 years perfecting that invisibility. Yeah, but what does it say about us that we never looked twice? That we never wondered if the person cleaning our floors might have a story worth knowing? Brennan sipped his coffee thoughtfully. It says we're human. We see what we expect to see. Maria knew that, used it as camouflage. Can't really blame us for falling for professional-level deception. I can blame myself for being a dick to her, Callahan said. You apologized. She accepted. You've moved on. Brennan gestured toward the range. Look at what came out of it. She's back doing what she was meant to do. 8 future snipers are. Learning from someone who actually lived it. That's not nothing. Commander Hayes joined them, carrying his own coffee and a folder tucked under his arm. He looked tired. The past 3 months had been politically challenging. Bringing on a civilian instructor with no official military record had required extensive paperwork, multiple justifications, and calling in favors from people Hayes would now owe for years. Gentlemen, Hayes greeted them. Enjoying the show? She's phenomenal, Brennan said. The candidates worship her. 3 of them have already said she's the best instructor they've ever had. Hayes nodded, a satisfied expression crossing his weathered features. I got some interesting news this morning. 2 of the other Nightingale operators have reached out. Through back channels. They heard Maria was teaching openly and wanted to know if we had positions available. Callahan's eyebrows rose. Seriously? Dead serious, Hayes confirmed. One's been working as a police sniper in Colorado. The other's been driving a truck in Oregon. Both of them have skills we could use, and both of them are tired of hiding. What did you tell them? Brennan asked. I told them I'd see what I could do, Hayes said. If we can bring in even half of the original Nightingale operators, we'd have the most skilled instruction staff in the country. Maybe the world. On the range, Maria had the candidates setting up for live fire exercises. She moved among them, making small adjustments to positions, offering quiet words of guidance. Callahan noticed how gentle she was with corrections, never humiliating or belittling, always teaching. She's different now, he observed. Lighter somehow. Truth does that, Hayes said quietly. When you stop carrying secrets, you stop carrying weight. She's not looking over her shoulder anymore. She's not wondering if today's the day someone recognizes her. She's just ... Present, Maria called for the first shooter to take position. A young corporal named Davis settled behind his rifle, and Maria knelt beside him, guiding him through the final checks. When Davis took his shot and missed the target by 6 inches, Maria didn't criticize. Instead, she walked him through what had gone wrong, breaking down each variable until the mistake became a learning opportunity. The second shot hit center mass. "That's what I'm talking about," Callahan heard Maria say, her voice carrying across the range. "You learn from the miss. That's what separates good snipers from dead ones, the willingness to adapt." Brennan checked his watch. "I've got a briefing in 20. You coming?" "In a minute," Callahan said. After Brennan left, Hayes and Callahan stood in comfortable silence, watching the training session continue. Finally, Callahan spoke. "Commander, can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Was it worth it? All the political capital you spent, all the fights you picked with people who outranked you, all the risk? Was bringing Maria out of hiding worth what it cost you?" Hayes considered the question carefully. 3 months ago, one of the most skilled snipers this country ever produced was cleaning toilets and living in fear. Today, she's training the next generation of warriors and sleeping through the night for the first time in 20 years. "So yeah, Staff Sergeant, it was worth every bit of political capital I spent." He started to walk away, then paused. "Besides, we're in the business of protecting people, right? Sometimes that means protecting them from external threats. Sometimes it means protecting them from the bureaucracy that's supposed to serve them. Maria Torres deserved better than what she got. I just made sure she finally received it." Callahan remained at his observation point until the training session ended. He watched Maria gather her students for a final debrief, saw the way they hung on her every word, noticed the respect in their eyes. These young Marines would go into combat with skills taught by someone who truly understood the cost of the trigger pull, who knew that every shot carried consequences that extended far beyond the target. As the candidates dispersed, Maria spotted Callahan and walked over. There was something different in the way she carried herself now, an openness that hadn't been there 3 months ago. "Staff Sergeant," she greeted him. "Come to check on my teaching methods?" "Just observing," Callahan sighed. "You're doing great work out there." "I'm doing what I should have been doing for 20 years, Maria corrected. "But better late than never, I suppose." They stood together, looking out at the range where this entire story had begun with a spilled bucket and a cruel joke. "You know what's funny?" Maria said. "If you hadn't handed me that rifle, if you hadn't pushed me into showing what I could do, I'd probably still be cleaning floors, still hiding, still carrying all that weight alone." "I'm not sure I deserve credit for being an asshole," Callahan said wryly. Maria laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that Callahan had never heard from her before. "No, you don't. But sometimes the universe works in strange ways. Your cruelty cracked the shell I'd built around myself. What happened after the truth, the job, the second chance, that's what matters." "Any regrets?" Callahan asked. "About coming forward, about teaching, about giving up the invisibility?" Maria thought about it for a long moment. "Every morning, I wake up and I'm a little scared. Scared that someone from my past will show up. Scared that the people who buried Karachi will decide I'm a threat. Scared that I'll let my students down." She turned to face him fully. "But then I get to the range and I see these young warriors who are trusting me to teach them how to stay alive, and the fear becomes motivation. Chun, Reeves, and Patterson died because someone made a mistake. I'm going to make damn sure their legacy is that every sniper I train comes home." She started to walk toward the parking lot, then looked back. "Oh, and Callahan? I'm still better than you with a rifle," he laughed. "Want to put money on that?" "Next week," Maria promised. 1,000 yards, winner buys dinner. Bring your A game. As she walked away, Callahan thought about the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A spilled bucket, a mocking challenge, a perfect shot that had revealed everything. 20 years of silence shattered in a single afternoon. He thought about Jessica Reeves, Amy Chun, and Monica Patterson, women whose names would never appear. In history books, whose sacrifices would never be publicly acknowledged, but whose skills and dedication would live on through every student Maria taught and he thought about. Maria Torres herself, a janitor who had been a warrior, a woman who had carried impossible secrets for 2 decades, a teacher who was finally home. The California sun beat down on the Naval Special Warfare Training Range, painting everything in golden light. In the distance, another group of candidates was arriving for their next training session. Young faces filled with determination and hope. Maria Torres would be waiting for them, and somewhere, in whatever comes after, 3 women who had died in Karachi were smiling. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.